Hello everyone and welcome to a new Lilja and Lou's podcast. Today we have some Stephen King news for you as usual, and we will have Tyson Blue, our most regular guests, here with us today. And today we will be talking about Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, both the book and the movie, and we will be comparing the both and see what we all think about it.
Welcome, welcome. Do not fear the door that lies before you. We will protect you. We are your guides, Hans and Lou, and we will give you the latest in Stephen King news. But before we do so, you must prove yourself worthy. You must open the door and join us in the death room.
Hey everybody, welcome back. It's been a while for Stephen King news, and there is a lot of it, so let's get right into it with our appropriately enough first item, which is entitled Double Feature. And the reason that title is appropriate is because Stephen King and his son, Owen King, will be appearing together for public appearance to do a talk at the 34th International Festival of Authors in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And they will be headlining the annual benefit, and this will take place at Thursday, October 24th at 8 p.m. in the Fleck Dance Theatre at Harbourfront Centre, Toronto. Now, that's the good news. The bad news is tickets sold out already in 20 minutes. So if any of our listeners are from that area, from the Toronto area, I used to live there myself, but unfortunately I no longer do, so I can't make it to this. But if you are going to attend, please let us know. And this should be very interesting considering that it's the first time that as far as I know, Hans, maybe you can correct me, this is the first time that Stephen King has appeared on the stage with one of his sons.
If I'm not mistaken, that there was one event where Stephen, Owen and Tabitha were on the stage at the same time. I can't remember what the event was, but I think they were on the stage all the time.
I just want to say that I've read Owen King's book, Double Feature, and it's definitely a different book than anything that his father has written, even though I think there's a theme through it that usually runs through Stephen King's work as well. So it's a very different book. It's kind of surreal. It's got larger-than-life characters. And I guess the best way to describe it would be like The World According to Garp crossed with The Big Lebowski and The Shawshank Redemption. So it's got some pretty memorable characters, and the through line really is a story about hope, which is why I included the Shawshank Redemption connection. But I really enjoyed it, and it had several pieces of it that made me laugh out loud, quite funny. And if you've read The World According to Garp and you remember the sequence where the plane crashes into the house, there's something kind of almost the same in this book as well. So it's a very interesting book, and Owen King seems to be a man much wiser than his years.
Yeah. I have actually started that book, and I'm having some trouble getting into it. It's not really the type of books that I usually read, so, well, I'll see what happens. And if you are interested in getting a signed copy of it and can't attend, Cemetery Dance will have some that they are selling for, I think it's about the same price as the book, so that might be worth checking out if you're interested. Okay, next item on the news is Joyland, who will be coming out in couple of months, and this time it's Publishing Weekly, who has gotten an early copy of it, read it, and written a short review of it. And I will not go into the details here because some of you might find this spoilerish. So if you go to my site where you are probably listening to this, if you're not listening on iTunes, there will be a link to the review, and you can decide for yourself if you want to check it out and see a little bit more about what the book is about. Mm-hmm. But I have a good feeling about this book.
Yeah, same here.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, same here. I'm without again, getting into specifics, I've heard references that it's, if you like the love story from 11/22/63 and the vibe that was created by the atmosphere of the Green Mile, that this book has elements of both of those stories in it. So that sounds very promising, to be sure.
Yeah.
Up next, prior to Stephen King's appearance later in the year in October with his son Owen, he will be appearing at the Mark Twain house in a conversation with Colin McRae, and this is scheduled to take place Thursday, July 18th at 8 p.m., and he will be in conversation with WNPR radio personality Colin McRae, and all the proceeds from this event are going to benefit the continuing education and preservation activities of the Mark Twain House and Museum. And that's a very interesting parallel because I think for a lot of us, Stephen King has been called the modern day Mark Twain. So the last time I checked, just shortly before this podcast, it looks like tickets were still available. So to any of the people in the Hartford, Connecticut area, July 18th, you have an opportunity to hear Mr. King. And I'm sure he'll have some very interesting insights into Mark Twain.
Yeah, I bet he has. Next up is Under the Doom, which is closing in pretty soon now on TV. And we have been getting both news about casting and some short trailers for it, or maybe more clips, promo clips. And I noticed before this podcast now that some of them have been removed from YouTube. I'm not sure why. They don't want to show too much yet, or they just changed their mind. But one tip for those of you who want to stay updated is to check out Dean Norris, actor, on his Twitter, where he has posted some pictures from both from the set and most recently one of him and King, in which he wrote in the text, "A very scary Breaking Bad fan. Oh, he also writes stuff." So pretty cool comment. So. I get a feeling that we will hear more from him, short tweets here and there. So it might be a good advice to check out that if you want to stay updated.
Yes, I agree. And I know some people say they don't like Twitter, but for this kind of on the spot, in the moment reporting or snapshots, I think Twitter is very good for disseminating that kind of information. And I really can't wait to see Dean Norris play Big Jim Rennie. I'm sure he's going to just nail that role. I think he's a perfect choice for that, and that should be a lot of fun to see. Yeah. Well, we're going to be talking about a remake, and it does start with a C, but it is not the one that you think we're probably going to talk about first. We're going to be talking about a big dog, and apparently Sun Classic, who owns the rights to Cujo for screen adaptations, has announced that they are going to be doing a remake of Cujo to celebrate the 30th anniversary. And this movie was released in 1983. We've reviewed it on the podcast, and I gotta say, I don't know. I've got real mixed feelings about this because part of Cujo really is dependent on the era in which it was originally written, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that when Donna Trenton gets trapped in her car on the farm, she had no way of communicating with anybody. But in today's world with cell phones, OnStar, if your car breaks down, you can call somebody. This story to work would have to go through some major revisions, and I don't really know if that's something I'm looking forward to seeing. I don't know how you feel about it, Hans.
No, first to begin with, I'm extremely skeptical that they will live up to their promise that they will give us a new version of Cujo this year. I mean, if they haven't shot it already in some distant place, I don't see how they're going to get the time to make it ready for before the year is over if they're going to do it properly. And I agree with you. I don't think it would work as good today. They could always use the trick they always use in horror movies that, oh, no cell phone coverage. Mm-hmm. Seems to happen every time there's
or the battery went dead or...
Yeah, exactly. So I guess, or maybe they hold it up to modern day, and she will tweet her husband and tell him, "You have to come and get me. I'm stuck in this car."
Yeah,
would be an interesting twist. So, but I don't have any higher hopes for this one. I think it will be something you will look at like maybe one of the Children of the Corn movies.
Yeah.
Okay, and last item on today is, of course, some Carrie news. What would a podcast be without any Carrie news? And this time it's actually something quite interesting. We have a new trailer for the movie, and I think it actually looks pretty promising. My only concern that I still have about this movie is if the cast is too, I want to say pretty, but really don't mean pretty, but too, I don't know how to describe it, but to not really look like real people, like two beautiful people. Am I making any sense at all?
Yeah, they're too movie-ish.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I have some issues with that, and I think there's some parts in this trailer where they are getting close to being too cute. But well, we will see soon. It's not that far away now. Oh
Yeah.
well, it's a couple of months, but.
Yeah, I've read feedback on it. A lot of people don't seem to really like it too much, to be honest. They think it gives away too much of the story, but I mean, at this stage of the game, who doesn't know what the story of Carrie is? So I take that with a grain of salt, and I actually think that's a good thing because it shows to me that they're being faithful to the book.
Yeah.
The real strong point for me was the moments that we saw of Juliana Moore. I think she's going to nail the performance of the mother, and but I do agree with some people that are complaining that Chloe Moretz is too pretty as Carrie. The transformation from when she's Carrie to when she's going to the prom doesn't seem to be that great. So yeah, that seems to be a complaint that has a lot of validity. I have to agree with that. But maybe that will play better in the movie if she's just really portrays herself as really being socially awkward. We'll have to see. But some of the criticism about showing too much of the story, I can't really agree with, because I think that was done to show us that it is going to be a more faithful adaptation of the book than the original movie, and I think that's a good thing to show. Yeah,
I can agree with it to some point, because I think with Carrie being such an old movie as it actually is, I think there's actually an entire generation of moviegoers that might not even have a relationship to the original movie, and they might not even know what that is. Mm-hmm. So for them, this might just be a Stephen King movie called Carrie. Some might not even know that they know that there's an old movie called Carrie, but they haven't checked it out. So I think there might be quite a lot of people who this will be their first Carrie experience on the big screen. Yeah. Not for us big King fan, of course, but I mean for the general population.
Okay, so that's the news for this segment.
Yeah.
This is great. What's our job? We'd like drive around and pick up stiffs or what?
It's time for reviews from the night shift.
There must be a con like me in every prison in America. I'm the guy who can get it for you. Cigarettes, a bag of reefer, if that's your thing, a bottle of brandy to celebrate your kid's high school graduation, damn near anything within reason. Yes, sir, I'm a regular Sears and Roebuck. So when Andy Dufresne came to me in 1949 and asked me to smuggle Rita Hayworth into the prison for him, I told him, no problem.
Hey everybody, we're back here together after an extended absence, but we're coming back with a bang, and we're going to talk about the Shawshank Redemption, the book and the movie, and I have with me my regular co-host. Hello, Hans.
Hello, everybody. Nice to be back talking again.
And our returning guest, great to have him back, is Tyson Blue.
Hey everybody, good to not see you again, but listen to you again.
And talk to Yes. All right, So we're going to talk about the movie and book versions of the Shawshank Redemption, and I've been kind of holding off on this one and trying to treasure the anticipation of this as long as possible, because for myself, I haven't asked Hans and Tyson where they rank this particular piece of work, but for me, the movie is my all-time favorite movie, and so I'm going to be probably doing a lot of gushing during this podcast, and I just want you to be aware of that up front. Hans, what do you think of the Shawshank Redemption?
Do you want to start about the movie or the book?
Just in general.
In general, yeah.
Yeah, just quick thoughts.
Yeah, as you say, it's great. Both the story and the movie is great, and they were not among the first movies I saw from King, but one of the fairly earliest movies I saw and liked quite well. So that was fun.
Okay. How about you, Tyson?
What he said, but no, it is one of my favorite of King's stories. I go back to it a lot. Between the audio version, which was read by the late Frank Muller, and just the story itself, I've read it significantly more than I have most of his other works. The movie is absolutely terrific. I think that Frank Darabont's screenplay actually improves on the novella to some extent. It makes it, or at least makes it flow better. cinematically. And once we get around to that, I can go into the details on that. But they're both fantastic.
Mm-hmm. And as for myself, I've already let the cat out of the bag that this is my all-time favorite movie. So, and I would also put forth, expanding slightly on Tyson's point, that I think this is one of those rare cases where the movie is actually better than the source material. And that's a pretty rare occurrence. I don't see that very often. But in this particular case, and especially for Stephen King work, I think that Darabont was in some sort of special groove when he wrote the screenplay for this movie, because I just think it really emphasizes and highlights elements of the book that weren't as clear. And fortunately, because of the title of the movie, it had a rough birth. When it was released back in September 25th, 1994, it pretty well tanked at the box office. It didn't make very much money at all, and Castle Rock was hard-pressed to get their money back initially on the $25 million budget that this movie was produced under. A solid budget for that time, not an outrageous budget, but it was an interesting exercise, I'm sure, from a production standpoint. And this is one of those movies that I've owned pretty well in every iteration. I've had it on videotape, I've had it on DVD. I have on DVD several times. I was fortunate to get the 10th anniversary edition, which included the music soundtrack and the Mark Commode book about it as well. It was pulled at one point in the States, and I'm not sure if it's available again. Tyson, is it something that you've seen, the 10th anniversary edition?
Don't remember seeing it recently. It's been pretty much taken over by the Blu-ray book version.
Okay, yeah, the Digipack, yeah. Yes, and I have that as well, and the Blu-ray is just fantastic. I thought the DVD was a big improvement over the VHS, but the Blu-rays, the movies never looked better, and especially on the sound department, if you listen to it in our surround system, it sounds awesome. So, I haven't gone through all of that. I want to ask you two both a question. I'll start with you, Tyson. Which do you like better, the book or the movie, and why?
I like the movie better. I like them both. It's a close thing, but I give the movie a slight edge. And a lot of it is what I referred to earlier, is the changes that Frank made in the story. It's a very faithful adaptation of the novella, but some of the things Frank does that tightens up and streamlines the story makes it work better as a movie and maybe ultimately as a story. The biggest thing that leaps immediately to mind is having the same warden in the prison throughout, whereas if I remember right, in the novella, Andy went through 3, maybe 4 wardens, and the guard was played by Clancy Brown, sort of fades into the background as the novella goes along, but he remains a steady villain throughout. And both the warden and the guard are steady villains throughout, and that makes the story flow better, and it makes the ending more satisfying to do after everything you've seen Andy go through at the hands of these two people. To have them taken down so thoroughly and satisfyingly at the end makes it work really better. I can understand why Steve wrote the story the way he did, because he was covering a really long period of time, and just in the course of administering prisons, people don't stay on a job like that for 40 or 30 or 40 years.
Yeah.
But doing it that way, cinematic, made it work better as a movie, and made the end that much more satisfying. And also the final climactic scene that was added on by Frank, apparently at the last minute, when they were saying, you really ought to show Andy and Red meeting up, because after all they've gone through to just leave everybody hanging like that. And besides, we've been shooting in this rainy, cold prison in Ohio all these months. We deserve a trip to whatever sunny place they actually shot that in.
Yeah, it was in the Barbados, I believe.
Those two things particularly stand out as ways that Frank condensed things and changed the story without changing the spirit of the story, which is important. I mean, my gauge for measuring movie adaptations of literary works is how faithful the film version is to the original. But it doesn't have to be a slavish imitation, as long as it gets the spirit of the book or the story on the screen. And Shawshank succeeds, and Frank succeeded to a degree that doesn't happen very often. And when it does, it's great.
How about you, Hans? Book, movie, or audiobook?
Yeah, well, for this time, when I was getting ready to speak to you about it, I actually listened to the audio version of it, read by Frank Muller, and it's a great audiobook. He does a great job reading it, and both the movie and the story are one of King's best, definitely. But I actually tend to lean a little bit more to the story.
Interesting. but
if I
not,
have to choose one.
not totally surprising, and I'll get into that why a bit later. But your answer doesn't surprise me, 'cause knowing you and your
Yep.
like for certain styles of horror.
Yep. But one of the things I felt that the build up to what Andy is actually doing, that he's planning this escape, to me that came a little bit more as a surprise when I read the story the first time, and then when I saw the movie, obviously I already know
Yeah.
the end, what the ending would be. But then when I listened to it again just recently now, again I felt that you almost didn't know what was going to happen, even though you did. So I think the build up to the ending is slightly better in the story, I think, and I think that is what would make me choose the story if I have to pick one of them.
Okay. Well, for me, it's obvious. The movie is a superior version of the story. And as Tyson touched on several aspects, I think, and I agree with him, the most important thing for an adaptation of a book or written material is that the filmed version captures the underlying theme and message, regardless of how whatever changes are done in order to streamline the story or what. Shawshank is a bit of a different egg in that respect because it's a novella, so in this case it actually needed a bit of fleshing out to make it into a cinematic adaptation. And as Tyson also mentioned, I think the biggest thing was making the guards, especially Clancy Brown's character of Hadley and the warden, who was played so wonderfully in this movie, consistent throughout the movie. It's not realistic, but from an emotional payoff point of view at the end of the movie, when these guys get their comeuppance, it definitely works much better in the movie than it does in the story. And I think the other area the movie surpasses the book is really with the character of Red himself, because in the book, Red is not nearly as sympathetic. He deliberately plans the murder of his wife and through a car accident, so that already makes him a much more difficult character to relate to. In the filmed version, Red is just a kid who made a terrible mistake and has been paying for that mistake for the rest of his life, much the same way that Andy Dufresne has, but of course Andy is innocent, whereas Red is the only guilty man in Shawshank. So I think those elements give the movie a much easier buy-in for the audience, and this is part of the process of making a film much more available to a wider audience as opposed to with a book. And in general, the book is much grimmer and more realistic in the way it's told, because we do have the turnover from the guards and that, and it's really just a two-character piece. It's really just Red and Andy. The rest of the cast, brought to life so wonderfully by Darabont's pretty well-known stable of character actors that he uses over and over again. It's just a wonderful job in the movie, and in the book you don't really get that sense of the other characters at all, except for Hadley as the main guard. But beyond that, it's really a story about Red and Andy. So I think Darabont just does a wonderful job, and I think this is his best adaptation of any of the King books. As much as I like The Green Mile, I didn't like I think he kind of fumbled it a little bit in the closing bookend, because Mr. Jingles is still living at the end of the movie, whereas in the book he passes away, so that gives hope for that character that he is going to be able to leave this world at some point. And in The Mist, as much as I enjoyed the twist on it, it's a darker ending than the original story, which had an open and still hopeful ending. So I think this is his purest adaptation out of the three, and it just works so well. It's just a rare case of an adaptation being superior to the source material. I just can't emphasize that enough.
I could see why some of the boys took him for snobby. He had a quiet way about him, a walk and a talk that just wasn't normal around here. He strolled like a man in a park without a care or a worry in the world, like he had on an invisible coat that would shield him from this place. Yeah, I think it would be fair to say I liked Andy from the start.
So let's turn our thoughts now towards why is this movie so popular? And Lilja, Hans, why don't you take a crack at that?
Well, I think foremost it's a great story, so of course it's going to be a popular story. But I think also that this is a story that it's not so depending on when you see it. Many movies, if we concentrate on the movie, gets outdated pretty quickly. But this movie is taking place in the past, So, and it doesn't really have that many special effects and stuff that can look old. So I think it's a movie that stands the time. I think that's also a reason why people can see it today and still think it more than just a great story. It's well done as well.
Okay. Anything else?
No, I mean, the story's good, the cast is good, everything is good about it. So what's not to like about it?
Okay. How about you, Tyson?
I agree with a lot of what Hans said. It has a terrific cast. Casting Morgan Freeman as Red was a stroke of brilliance on Darabont's part. I mean, in the story, he's a white Irish guy with red hair, but there's no reason he necessarily has to be Caucasian to be the narrator of the story, and just having that terrific narrative voice that has, we've heard his voiceover in so many movies and TV shows and commercials and so on. Just it lends a presence to his character that you wouldn't get with most other actors in the part. And also Morgan Freeman is a great actor and was able to hold the screen with Tim Robbins as Andy Dufresne, and the two of them were able to portray this friendship that spreads over decades in this really horrible place really well.
I agree with you guys. I think the casting in this movie was inspired. The Morgan Freeman casting was, just one of those amazing things of coming together with the right project. And as you mentioned, Tyson, his narrative voice has become part of our culture to the point where when something's really worked its way in, that it has even become parodied at times. So it's kind of like when Anthony Hopkins first graced the screens as Hannibal Lecter. He first terrified us, but then over time, as we worked into the culture, you started to see parodies of him, and that's happened to Morgan Freeman's narrative voice. I think that's just a measure of how popular it is. And I had occasionally checked on IMDb for the longest time. Shawshank was listed as number 2 below the first Godfather, and I just checked before this podcast, and now it's tied with the same rating for The Godfather, but it's got like almost 280,000 more votes. So for all intents and purposes, it is the number 1 movie on IMDb. Now, how much value you place on those kinds of rankings, but it's there. There's not another movie in that slot, so I think that's just the measure of it. And this movie has a theme of hope that you just don't get in other stories. And as I was mentioning earlier with Darabont's adaptations of The Green Mile and The Mist, I think he fumbled the ball on the hope aspect, because one of the things I like about Stephen King's stories, and I think this is a subconscious thing, I don't know if he's even aware of it, or maybe he is that no matter how terrible his stories are, there's always a ray of sunshine at the end of it, whether it's The Stand or The Dark Tower. And there's a trend with a lot of horror today to be very nihilistic with no hope at the end of the story. And I think that stories that do include hope in them still resonate, and I think that's one of the reasons why this movie is so popular with a lot of people. So I think that's a very important element, that no matter how terrible the story is, there's still redemption at the end of it, no matter how far-fetched it is or how fairy tale like it might seem, even in the Shawshank Redemption. But that's a powerful message, and this is, for me, it's a movie that when I'm feeling blue or down, I watch it, but at the end of it, it's kind of like a Rocky picture. You walk away, you feel your soul is recharged, you feel juiced up again. So I think that's another very important aspect of it. And there's other things as well, not as important to other people probably, but I do love the soundtrack from this movie. I think Thomas Newman did a great score, and I mentioned earlier the Darabont's cast of character actors, I think, just do a great job of bringing these other characters to life. So it's quite enjoyable from that aspect as well. And a movie is only as good as the hero's bad guys are. And the warden, played by Bob Gunton, and of course William Sadler as Captain Hadley. Those two guys were just fantastic as the bad guys as well. So
yeah, it's quite ironic that one of the most popular Stephen King movies is one of the least that's connected to him, if you ask. People think this as a King movie. Yeah,
and one of his greatest stories that he likes to bring out from time to time is, of course, the old lady that he bumps into in the supermarket, who says, I know you, I've read your stories. He said, you should write something happy and light, like the Shawshank Redemption. And Stephen tells her that, I wrote that. And she says, no, you didn't. And he says, okay, that's a great story. So.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like it would have been pretty easy to prove by just going over to the book section of the grocery store and pulling out a copy of different seasons and saying, look, oh, no, this one's called Rita Hayworth in Shawshank Redemption. See, I told you so.
Why? Yeah.
But Lou, I agree with your assessment about the importance of the theme of hope, because that's the thing I've had people, when I'm talking about the movie with people, that's the one thing that comes up almost every time. I think it is an important aspect of it. And equally in there and helping it along is Thomas Newman's score for that. I agree. It's one of his best scores. And I think, Frank made a wise choice to have him score both of his really big King films. And it's one of the ones I actually went out and bought the soundtrack album for.
Yep.
And do enjoy listening to it from time to time.
Yeah, me too. The other element that I think you touched on it, Tyson, and it was brought home to me more. I think it's something I just sort of take for granted when I'm watching the movie, but just watched the Siskel and Ebert review of it. And one of the things they really liked about the movie is it shows this friendship between these two male characters over a long period of time, which is not something that you see a lot of in movies, because it's usually Mike Macho, whatever, or the two leads are often against each other as the hero and the villain. But in this one, you just get to see two guys slowly form a friendship from totally different backgrounds, come together and form a friendship in one of the worst places that imaginable. So it's like Siskel said, this movie, if you take away the prison locale, it's a lot like taking away the mental ward locale from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So it's, these characters in a terrible situation, but still able to find hope, even though the Cuckoo's Nest ending, of course, is a lot more tragic than than the Shawshank. But I agree with his assessment. I think it's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is also one of my favorite movies, is very similar in tone or themes to the Shawshank Redemption. So
and I must say I'm a bit different than you guys, and you know that this, Lou, that I actually like movies that doesn't end quite as well as this one.
Yeah, that's why I know you like the book better.
Yeah,
because it's a bit grimmer, right?
Yeah,
yeah.
But this one, I actually like the ending of this, but it can't be too cozy at the ending. I mean,
no.
I was just seeing Oblivion today. I don't know if you have seen it.
No.
Tom Cruise.
No, it's not.
And
don't spoil it.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say that I was about to puke when I left it. So, but
okay.
I'll leave that up to you guys.
But
yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up, because there's another series that just finished, and that was the Starz series Spartacus. And again, it's a struggle of free men in an oppressive society. And if you like that kind of story, this is a very bawdy and violent 300 style of violence, very operatic violence. There's a lot of nudity, all configurations, so you're offended by that. But I think it really captures the period and time of when those events took place. And it's just a really well-written series that arced characters from, especially obviously Spartacus from the beginning to how he grew to where he ended up. And that story is very similar in themes to what the Shawshank Redemption does, but if that one takes place over 3 or 4 seasons of TV. But if you're not offended by violence and nudity, I highly recommend that series for this similar type of story.
Yeah.
So
and this movie was one of the first King movies to get numerous Oscars.
Nominations,
right?
7 nominations, no wins.
Yeah, sorry, nominations.
Yeah.
And so that was extra push for it, I think.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of what happened in Shawshank paved the way for to enable Darabont to do the Green Mile for sure.
Yeah.
Which I'm glad he got to do for reasons of my own.
Yes, of course.
We'll talk about that when we get to that movie.
Let's talk about what our favorite parts of the movie were. And I'll let you go first, Tyson.
Well, my absolute favorite scene in the movie is one that got cut out, and it's a scene that's in the novel. And I've only seen it once. I'm not sure where I even saw it. It's the scene where after they've discovered Andy's escape, and that is actually my favorite scene in the movie. But right after it, when the warden sends the guard in after him, and he goes down and he finds the broken sewer pipe, and has his reaction, which I'm not sure you want me to say on broadcast.
Yeah, I think I've seen that too. Yeah,
I don't remember why Frank cut it out. He did shoot the scene, and it was very funny. But I think the reason was that the way it's cut together, the warden comes in, has his hissy fit, and throws the pebble at the Raquel Welch poster. And instead of bouncing off, it goes through it and then rolls down, and you hear it bouncing down in between the walls, and he rips it aside, and then the camera pans out really fast through the escape tunnel, and then they cut immediately to the police cars racing in, and it's very fast paced. And I think that leaving the scene in would have interrupted that, and and made it not move so well. But I just like the way that works, because the way they've set the whole sequence up is Red has that conversation with Andy out in the yard where Andy sounds like he's
Suicidal.
at the bottom of the barrel. He's suicidal, and then Red finds out that he got some rope from some of the other people, and he's sitting there wondering if he's going to be alive the next morning when they have the roll call, and then he's just vanished.
Like a fart in the wind.
That's true.
That was a great line.
It's just, I mean, the lead up to it just builds and builds, and then all of a sudden you get it's like a bowstring being released. Almost literally, the camera flies back through the tunnel, and you have all the police cars coming and everything getting discovered.
Yep.
Along with the shot of the warden opening up the box and finding Andy's ratty shoes in it instead of his polished black shoes.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I like it, because the build up to it is so spectacular.
Yeah.
Close second would be the opera scene where Andy just sort of stages this passive rebellion to play opera for everybody instead of Hank Williams.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that was it. I think that was it for me.
Okay. How about you, Hans? Your favorite moments from the movie?
There are several, but I like it close to the ending where you get to see what Andy has really been doing instead of how he's been planning. You get to see everything that he's done and how he's planned it and what he's done behind their backs.
Yeah.
And you go like, that's, and you get it all explained, and I like that part of it.
Okay.
And I like the part where on the roof where he the first time he suggests that he should do, is it Texas?
No, his Hadley get an inheritance. Yeah.
They teach how to avoid paying taxes on the inheritance legally.
Yeah. So I like those two scenes the best, I think.
Yeah, I really like how he set up that shot where Hadley's dragging him over to the rooftop and they pan up and over him so that you kind of get the feeling of the height as the shot's going on. Yeah, the rooftop scene.
Also know that it's actually Tim Robbins doing the scene too.
Yeah, he was apparently wired and everything. But that whole sequence from the moment where Andy walks up to Hadley to talk about if he trusts his wife, to them getting the beer, and then this is where Thomas Newman's score is just fantastic. They're all sitting there drinking that beer, and Andy's just leaning against the wall watching them drink it. That's just fantastic. Tyson, you mentioned the opera scene. Again, that's a great one as well. And I think you also touched briefly on the get busy living, get busy dying conversation that Red and Andy have out in the courtyard. That was great scene because the dialogue is going one way and leading you in one direction, but after you see the movie the first time, when you can watch it again the next time, you realize that dialogue was totally going in the other direction. And I even like Red's line about saying to Andy, this is a shitty pipe dream, because when you get to see him escape, that's exactly what it is. So that was there's like really clever writing during those sequences.
You almost have to see the movie twice to get all the meanings of every line in it.
Yeah. The other sequences that I really enjoyed, and the first one was a wonderful setup as well, because you thought it was going to be Andy coming into Shawshank, but it's actually Red's first parole meeting. And then over time, he learns not to care about what other people think, because by the time he gets to the last parole sequence, he just tells them that he doesn't give a care what they think anymore. And if that's the time they grant him his parole. So those three parole scenes show the arc of Red's character. And that's one of the things I also liked about the movie, is that the movie doesn't make it clear at first, if you watch it the first time, whose story it really is, and because it really is Red's story. It's obvious, I think, when you read the novella whose story it is, but in the movie it's left much more nebulous, but it still really is Red's story. So that was one of the other things I liked about the movie as well. I just wanted to mention quickly some of the effective moments, just for setting up this environment that Andy's come into, was of course the fresh fish sequence, and then the beating that led to the death of the one prisoner. I thought those two sequences really established what kind of a world Andy was entering into quite effectively. And then wonderful character actor James Widmore, his scenes as Brooks, a character I think mentioned maybe once or twice in the novella, but here he gets a whole arc as well, which nicely foreshadows what Red is going to go through when he gets out. So, and a nice little bit of diversion there as well, because you think Red's going to hang himself as well. So again, another inspired bit of extension of the story that Darabont did. And I just wanted to mention one more thing. I'm sorry I'm doing a lot of talking, guys. thanks. I'm feeling bad. But one of the big things with Blu-ray is the clarity that it adds to when you're watching it. So when I was watching it, and I just picked up on something that I hadn't seen or noticed before, but it's in the Get Busy Living Dying scene. When Red's walking up to Andy, you can see he's kicking this rock several times before he gets to Andy. And then, as you mentioned, Hans, we get to see the sequences afterwards where we see Andy, all the things that he did to get ready for his escape. And you can see him letting the rocks out through his pants.
Yeah.
And those rocks that he let out through his pants are the exact same one or composition as the one that Red is kicking. So I don't know if that was just they shot those scenes together so they just used the same kind of production stock of prop rocks or whatever, or that was just kind of a subtle thing where Red's kicking probably what was the last few stones that Andy had discarded in the jail yard before he escaped. So I thought that was really cool. So really getting down to the nitty gritty now. But watch for that. If you have the Blu-ray, watch that rock that Red's kicking. It's the exact same kind of material as what Andy was taking out of his jail cell wall. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, you mentioned in the beginning that the title was a bit unwelcomed in the US.
Yes.
At the beginning.
Yep.
Yeah. Here in Sweden, it was, if you translate it from Swedish, it was The Key to Freedom was its title here. So I don't know how well that translated.
Yeah, that probably would have worked better. Made, at least thematically, I think people could have picked up on, oh, this guy's going to escape or something. I think they wanted to hide that aspect of the story for as long as possible, so that's probably why they didn't do that.
Yeah, and it's kind of really revealing on those movie posters where you have Tim Robbins with no shirt on in the rain, holding his hands up. I mean, it's a prison movie, and you don't see that often in the prison, I guess. At least not here in Sweden.
Yeah.
So...
That's all I had. Is there any final thoughts from either of you? Hans, is there anything else that you want to say about the movie that we haven't brought up yet?
Well, I'm a bit surprised actually that everyone I've spoken to think this is a good movie. I mean, it is a good movie, but it's very rare that you get a movie that everybody likes. I mean, I know other movies that I think is great, and a lot of people think is great, but there's always someone who doesn't like it. Mm-hmm. But I haven't heard from anyone who doesn't like this one. Have you?
I've heard people say that they think it's overpraised, but I've never heard anybody come out say that's a terrible movie. No.
Yeah, I can agree to some degrees that maybe it's building its own word, that it gets better and better the more you talk about it. So, but it's a good movie, and everybody says it's a good movie, and I'm a bit surprised that. I mean, there has to be someone that doesn't like it, right?
Well, I'm sure there is, but they're obviously in the minority, so. Yeah,
but it's strange. I mean, you often hear that someone doesn't like it, but that's not the case with this one. I wonder why.
Well, I think it just comes back to the theme of hope. That's why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the closest I've ever come was talking to someone, and I brought up the fact that at that point it was number one on IMDb's list, and he poo-pooed the idea that it was on. I mean, it's a nice story, it's a good story, he said, but I don't. And then I was sure he had something more conventionally classic in mind, maybe, but he didn't actually propose anything. So, but that's about as close as I've ever come to finding anybody who had a negative comment. I mean, I'm sure there's people who don't like it somewhere, but just don't hear from them.
Yeah.
Is this your number one movie, all categories?
Who are you asking?
Both of you.
Yes, for me it is.
Yeah.
It's pretty close, I think. It might move around temporarily for other ones, but it's pretty consistent. It's one of my favorites.
Okay.
Sometimes I give The Green Mile a little precedence just for personal reasons, but
sure. Yeah, The Green Mile's so close, but it's just that final bookend with the mouse at the end. It just kind of leaves it a little tainted for me. How about you, Tyson? Do you got any final thoughts on The Shawshank Redemption that we haven't brought up in discussion yet?
Not necessarily. It was surprising that it was made at all in the time it came out, and in a way, the movie's own fate bore out the general theme of it, because I mean, at first it comes out and then it sinks out of sight. It could have been the end of Darabont's directing career on the spot, because when I was working on The Green Mile, we talked about this movie to some extent, and he said they paid him a boatload of money or they offered him a boatload of money for the screenplay, but they wanted somebody else to direct it, and he held out to direct it, so it was kind of like an all or nothing proposition for him. And then at the last moment, it gets rescued by finding this second life on video.
Yep.
And from there, it just sort of took off and became a cult classic. So it's not the first time that's happened. Movies like The Wizard of Oz and It's a Wonderful Life both did horrible at the box office and have gone on to be considered classic too.
Citizen Kane.
Yeah.
Okay.
Isn't that strange that it didn't go better at the movies since it's so popular?
Well, nobody knew the story then, right? That's the big, and I think the biggest thing, and I know Morgan Freeman brought it up when he was on the Charlie Rose show. Says, well, what was the problem with this? It's, well, the big thing was the title, and he says, and we had the right title. He said he should have called it Rita Hayworth in the Shawshank Redemption, because he said if you have her name in it, then people would identify with it more. But you've seen like Tim Robbins talk about in interviews, people come up to the street saying, "Oh, I just love that Scrimshaw exception," or people just Shawshank Redemption just doesn't do anything on its own, which was the big problem. And I'd like to expand on Tyson's point where he said that the movie's fate or story has been mirrored in its failure to ignite the box office, but then it came to life in home video, and much is the same way that it was had all those 7 Academy Award nominations, but it won none of them. Lost to Forrest Gump. People would pick Pulp Fiction over both of these movies from that year. But I think in a way that, or I feel that it's losing that nomination actually has enhanced its reputation as well, kind of mirroring the theme of the movie again, that it didn't matter that it didn't win with the Academy because it's won with the general population. So again, and I really just think it comes down to that basic story of hope, theme of hope. People like to believe in stories that give hope.
Well, was it marketed as a Stephen King movie in the States?
Not at all.
Not at all. Okay.
No.
Do you think that could have contributed to making it not so popular?
I don't really think so, because if they had done that, I think people would have gone into it expecting a more traditional Stephen King movie with monsters and fur and fangs and gory things, and maybe if they were lucky a cameo by Stephen King instead of this very different story. So I think it was probably the right marketing strategy, but that also created a situation where you had this movie with a title that was kind of strange, that didn't really tell you much of anything about what you were going to see, and that might have kept some people away. I mean, even Raiders of the Lost Ark tanked initially when it came out in the U.S. back in 1980 or 81, because everybody thought it was a movie about Noah's Ark or something, and it was only when word of mouth spread around that word got out, and you should go see this movie, that it took off. And luckily, because it was a Lucasfilm Spielberg production, and it had the legs to stay in theaters long enough for people to discover it and start going. But actually, I was one of the lucky people. I did see Shawshank in the theater, and it was the last week of like a 2, maybe 3 week run. So,
and the theater was empty, right?
There were, let's see, I went with my daughter and her friend, and there were maybe 5 or 6 other people there.
Yeah.
Well, here in Sweden, it was marketed as a Stephen King movie, and I think at the time that was a big mistake, because Stephen King wasn't very popular in that time. So I don't know. I think it would have been received better if it would have been like a Morgan Freeman movie, or what's his name?
Tim Robbins.
Tim Robbins, thank you. I think it would have made a better success here if it would have been marked with one of those names instead of Stephen King, actually. So,
right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's all we've got for Shawshank Redemption, the book and the movie.
Yep.
I hope everybody's enjoyed our discussion. Probably some of you are going to find it a little too gushy, but it's my passion film, so there you go. I apologize.
Passion is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I just think it's a fantastic story. So
yeah.
There is one little coda that I wouldn't mind going into if you've got the time, and that is the reason I kind of invited myself on this week, which is that I've actually been to Shawshank. The Ohio State Reformatory in Mansfield is now a museum, and you can go there.
I thought it was demolished, or is that
only there's that great helicopter shot in the beginning of the movie where it flies down the drive leading up to the prison, and the part that you see then, the gatehouse, and the cell blocks on either side of it are still there. Everything else you see in that shot has been demolished, and the new prison was built maybe a quarter of a mile beyond it.
Oh, okay.
But the front part is still around as a museum, And like the Tennessee Reformatory and the Green Mile, it's made available as a film set. Some videos have been shot there. Shawshank obviously was shot there. That's the most famous thing. But the Harrison Ford movie, Air Force One, the scenes in the prison in whatever European country the terrorist was being held in, that they were holding Air Force One hostage to get released, those scenes were filmed at Mansfield.
Cool.
We were on a trip to Kentucky one time to meet some friends of ours, and on the way down on the expressway heading south towards Lexington from Cleveland, I saw a sign for Mansfield, and I asked my wife, how far off of this road is Mansfield? She said, it's right there. And so I said, well, we're stopping in here on the way back. And so it was maybe 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a kind of a gray, gloomy day. And so we got off, and literally you get off of the expressway and you turn to the right and you go through a short growth of trees. And as soon as you pass that, you come to a short hill, and right at the bottom of the hill, you turn to the right and you're heading down that driveway. So we got there, and there was one person there. He was like the curator, and because at that time they had 3 different tours available. One was for people who were interested in it as a prison facility. One was if you were interested in the ghosts that are rumored to haunt it. And then there was the Shawshank tour, and because it was the end of the day and there was nobody there but us, he gave us all 3 of them mashed together into one big 2-hour extravaganza. And it was kind of surprising. Some of the scene in the boarding house room where James Whitmore and Morgan Freeman both stayed, and where James Whitmore hangs himself and so forth, is actually in the upper stories of the front part of the prison building, the one part that looks like a castle. And there was another room. I think the grocery store may have been set up in a room in the prison as well. You can still see the escape tunnel through the walls, which basically looks like a big piece of ductwork. That's still lying around in the prison. Then they show it to you. And there's actually a Shawshank Trail in Mansfield where you can go and visit all of the locations that they used when they were shooting the movie. In fact, they have a website you might want to check out. It's www.mrps.org. And that has a lot of information about it, including Labor Day weekend this year, August 30th through September 1st, is the 20-year reunion for Shawshank. And they have 3 days of activities planned around the movie. So far, at least, it doesn't look like anybody from the cast or the crew is going to be there. But all of these tours are available and special programs and so forth. So that's something listeners might want to look into if they're in the U.S. or planning on being there and have nothing better to do than go visit a prison, which is kind of interesting.
What I did on my summer vacation.
Yeah. Now you just have to convince your family that it's the great vacation, right, Lou?
That's right.
Yep.
But it actually is. They take you all the way through the remaining parts of the prison, including up to the guard towers. On the back of the cell blocks. And if you have a good head for heights, you can climb up these rickety stairs and step into the guard tower for a minute and look around. It was actually a fun trip. So
cool.
Yeah, sounds like a great place to visit.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad you remembered that at the last minute.
Yeah.
That's a good addition. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
With that, Tyson, thank you very much for coming on once again.
Always glad to.
Yep. And Hans, I hope I didn't steal too much of the show away from you.
No way.
But
I love to hear you talk about your passion.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to talking about this for a long time, so this was a lot of fun for me.
Yep.
And I hope that the listeners will enjoy it just as much. Alrighty, so till next time, take care, everyone.
So that's it for this edition of Lilja and Lou's podcast. But before we sign off, I want to remind everybody to head over to Lilja's library and check out the contest I'm running there. Prize is a gift edition of Dr. Sleep, straight from Cemetery Dance.
Sweet.
Yeah, and all you have to do is take a photo of you and your favorite King book. And that could be any book, in any state, in any form, in any language. Just your favorite book and you. Send it to me and I will pick a winner. So while you do that and while we recover from this podcast and we will be back. Hopefully not will not take this as long as it took for this one to come out. And what we're going to talk about then, we haven't decided yet. So if you have any suggestions, post them on the Facebook page and we might select one of your suggestions. But until then,
stay safe, but Stay scared.
I was putting my daughter's new bed together.
Oh, okay.
So time
Did you get it
flies.
from IKEA?
Yeah, actually I did.
Is that the only furniture store you have there?
No, we have others.
Oh, okay.